Today, I'm joined by two amazing speakers, which I'm going to go through in a second. Please note, Olga, I'm so grateful that she's here, but she does have to run off to court, so does have a hard stop today. So I probably will focus on her questions first. So for those of you who I don't know, my name is Jackie Dumovich, and I've got to run my own slides, so let me flick across. So my name's Jackie Dumovich, and I'm the CEO of Hover UAV. I've been in the industry now for, I can't believe it's going to be nearly 9.5 years, and it's sort of blending all together. And Hover's been around for that time. And what we like to do is we love to help people move forward. I'm not going to do a sales pitch. I can talk a little bit about what we do and how we're supporting the industry at the end after we get started. Why we started the CRP sessions was, I feel that there's sort of a lack. There's nowhere for chief remote pilots to continue moving. There's nowhere for them, to go and ask questions. I also got a lot of phone calls every week, so it was to try to limit some of that as well. So we are continuing these every 2 months. We're going to be running a professional development series. And so, yeah, if you've got any ideas of what you want to learn, please let me know as well. So as mentioned, we're going to get straight into it. Our first speaker will be Olga. She's from Norton White. Norton White is acknowledged as a leader in practice of transport law with specialised teams devoted to aerospace, maritime logistics and tourism. They advise industry and insurers on liability, regulatory, corporate and commercial matters. So our first speaker from Norton White is Olga Kubyk, and she's an experienced aviation, marine and transport lawyer. And she regulatory acts for the aviation insurers and their insured airline and aviation insured in passenger baggage and cargo liability claims in courts and tribunals across various states. I'm going to hand you over to Olga now and let her do the first presentation. And Olga, if you just wanted to, further introduce yourself to what as well.
Oh, no, thanks so much, Jackie. That was a perfect introduction, and thanks for the warm welcome. Thanks also for the opportunity to be here. I'll just take a moment to share my slides. Yeah. Just bear with me.
I just have to stop sharing.
Okay, here we go. Does that work?
On mute. Yes, it works perfect. Thanks, Olga.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I'll speak to you today about the liability in RPAS operations. So delving straight into it, the liability regime, just because of the nature of the drone operations, the liability exposure is quite broad and diverse. You will hear more from what I understand from James later on about the trends of where the current exposure lies, but by far the most common liability exposure is surface damage liability. And by that I mean personal injury or property damage on the ground to either persons or property. And that will be the focus of my presentation today, given the limited time. There is a dedicated liability regime that applies to these sort of cases, and it is that top one here, the Damage by Aircraft Act 1999 is a federal legislation. In certain circumstances, the state legislation also applies, and I'll explain towards the end of the presentation of what the key sort of differences are, and we'll also explore in what circumstances each of the regimes apply. There is, the surface damage regime is a non-exclusive liability regime, and by this slide I was hoping to communicate that indeed the potential liability is much more complex and varies depending on the circumstances, and here I've set out some of the key sources or areas of liability that you might come across as well. So a bit of a disclaimer as well. I given the time pressures, I will not go into a huge detail as to how the Damage by Aircraft Act operates, but I will cover as much as possible. But please be mindful that in reality, and given the factual scenarios that you might come across, the application of the act is much more complex than what I'll be able to cover in the time, but I'm obviously happy to explore that in question time a little bit more. Moving on to the next slide. So before sort of delving into the nitty-gritty details of where the liability lies, it is very important to understand which of the either the federal legislation or the state legislation applies. So on this slide, the top blue sort of figures, I've extracted the parts of the application that is most applicable to drones. So if you operate a drone that is owned by a corporation or is operated by a corporation, the Commonwealth legislation applies there. So the Damage by Aircraft Act 1999 applies. Then the international and interstate drone flights, it's mostly for my hope for the future that is in our close future that such drones will be operational. But if that is the case, again, the Commonwealth legislation applies. And it also applies where the drones are flown from, to, or within the territories. So the way it works, if you basically satisfy any of those 4 criteria, then the federal legislation applies. Then conversely,
just really quick to jump in to break it down. We've got a lot of people from small organisations through to larger one. A corporation. So if I was a single operator running under my own ABM, and am I a corporation, or we're more talking? We have an ACN number. That's a corporation.
Well, a corporation, it's a bit more complex than that. It's hard to say, but in general, it will be a registered corporation, and you'll have to undertake commercial activities. So it has to be a trading corporation. So you need to be doing everything for award, basically. Yeah, does that clarify things?
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so conversely, all other commercial drone flights are governed by the state legislation, and one would probably only can only think of very small number of those drone flights to which state legislation will apply. Well, as far as the commercial flights are concerned. So one example would be a flight that is entirely within one state, that is conducted by a privately owned aircraft, which has taken off and landed at a Commonwealth-owned aerodrome. So as you can see, it's a very narrow set of circumstances, and I'm not sure that's very practical or comes up very often in practice. But a significant application of the state legislation is to the model aircraft. So the Damage by Aircraft Act of the Federal Act excludes from the definition of an aircraft model aircraft, and I will cover what that means in the next slide. So model aircraft is an aircraft other than balloon or kite that does not carry a person. And one of 2 types. So it either weighs no more than 150 kilos and is being operated for the purpose of sport or recreation. And although sport or recreation is not really defined, one would probably think of it as a hobby or for pleasure. So it does not generate a direct commercial outcome of any sort either. And the second type of a model aircraft is an aircraft which weighs no more than 7 kilos and is being operated in connection with the educational training or research purposes of either school or higher educational provider. So it's basically if you're flying a drone for university research that probably, and it weighs no more than 7 kilos, it's probably something that would apply to you. Just looking at this definition got me thinking that something like an autonomous passenger vehicles will not qualify as model aircraft because obviously they will carry a person. And so in that circumstance in the future, the strict unlimited liability regime of the federal federal act will apply. So the result of all of this is that depending on the use to which a drone is put, some drone operations will fall under the Act under the federal Act, whilst the others will not, even though both operations involve identical types of drones with identical consequences. But either way, the main thing I'm trying to communicate, and for you, if there is one thing that you'll remember from the presentation, and I'm hoping it's that's one of the points, is that if you have a commercial operation, you're doing it for a reward, and through a corporation, then the federal legislation will apply. If you're an individual flying a drone for recreation and you are not getting paid for it, then or also university research, then the state legislation would apply. And I'll go through, as I said before, what the differences are towards the end of the presentation. So this is the main gist of the strict and of the liability regime, and that is that there is a strict. So if the federal legislation applies, there is a strict and unlimited liability for personal injury, loss of life, material loss, damage, or destruction to a person or property on or under land or water caused by certain factors which are listed in A through to D. So what does the strict liability means? And that basically means that if there is an accident involving a drone and either property or a person gets injured or damaged, then the certain people will be liable for that loss or damage without proof of any intention, negligence, or any fault. So it's basically liability established irrespective of any cause. So for example, if there is a malfunction caused by a defect in design of a drone, then it doesn't really matter that it's a manufacturing defect. It is the owner and operator, which I'll later explain in a bit of detail, who will be liable. And that is also why it is very important to get insurance because of the strict and liability regime. But that's I'll defer that to James to cover. So just going through these causal factors, the first is where a loss or damage caused by an impact with an aircraft that is in flight. So that's one of those, what comes to mind is that incident where a drone flew into a window of a hotel in Darling Harbour in Sydney a couple of years ago. So that would cover that example. And the second one is a loss or damage caused by an impact with a part of an aircraft that was damaged or destroyed in flight. So if a drone gets damaged when flying, for example, in bad weather, and a part of the equipment falls on the ground and either hits a person or causes some damage to property, that's the sort of thing that subparagraph B covers. And then sub C is about an impact with a person or animal or thing that dropped or fell from an aircraft in flight. And I've this section was subject to some case law, and I've included the case references there, and I think I've circulated the links to Hover, so hopefully you get that if in case you're interested in having a look. But both
we've been putting them in the chat for people that want to have a look at that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, they go for pages and pages, so I don't expect anyone to read all of it from cover to cover, but they basically involve similar sets of circumstances where an occupier of a farm engaged an aerial operator to spray its crops for herbicide, and somehow that herbicides travelled onto a neighbouring land and then impacted the crops of the neighbouring land, and then the owner of the neighbouring land brought proceedings against various people, including the aerial operator, and in one, I think in the later case, against the actual pilot as well. So in the first case, NM Rule Enterprises, there was an argument that this subsection only covered inadvertent fallings from the aircraft. So given that in this circumstance the spraying was actually intentional, that wasn't covered by subsection C, but that wasn't accepted by the court, and it was expressly held that both intentional and inadvertent acts that were dropped from an aircraft were covered and are subject to this provision. And I think this is very important for drone operators, given that spraying crops is a very common use case scenario. Sub D is concerned with something that is a result of an impact of a kind mentioned in A, B, and C. And this is more of a consequential provision. So I've also noted a case there, just to give you an example, that one concerned a crop dusting aircraft that collided with a power line conductor, and an electrician employed by the owner of the power line conductor approached the conductor before it was isolated and then stumbled and fell and got electrocuted, thereby suffering serious injuries. And so the case ended up in the High Court, and the High Court held that the dangerous position of the conductor that was as a result of the crashing of the aircraft into it was something that is a result of an impact between the aircraft in flight and the conductor within the meaning of the subsection. So it's more of a consequential, but it's still captured by the provision. So just mindful of time. In terms of, I might just cover this slide next and then stop there and hand over to James, but I'm happy for my slides to be circulated if anyone needs them. In terms of who's liable, it is the owner and operator who jointly and severally liable. The operator, the owner is not defined, but obviously someone who has title to aircraft. The operator is someone who ultimately comes down to whoever controls air navigation. And then the pilot is generally not liable so long as they're employed by an employer, and in that case the employer is held liable. And we can explore that further down, but I think for the purposes of this sort of presentation, it's you'll need to make sure that you are an employee and doing work in the course of your employment to get the protection. The but there are several defences as well. So to escape liability, the owner can show that it had no active role in the operation and someone else had an exclusive right to use the aircraft. So it's basically someone, the lessee will be liable instead. And then the operator, they have two defences. One is the sublease of an aircraft, and that's point one. And the second one is the hijacking situation where they were using aircraft without the authority of a person entitled to control the air navigation. And so instead of the operator being liable, it'd be the operator would not be liable in that circumstance, but only provided that they took reasonable precautions. And I thought as well, this point is very important for drone operators because it's a lot easier to hijack a drone as opposed to a conventional aircraft. So very important to have a sufficient cyber attack protection, and it just highlights the importance of cyber security. I'm just mindful of time, so I might just I've just got I just had another slide which explains sort of the position under the state legislation, but in effect, if you are a person operating a flying an aircraft for recreational purposes and not getting any award, it's a state act that will apply, and it's still it is still strict liability. So you don't escape this strict liability regime, but there's certain differences as to proof and also damages that are recoverable, and under the state legislation they're more contained, so they're not unlimited liability as such. So I might just stop there and hand it over to James to speak about the insurance part.
Yeah, perfect. I'll hand back to me for a second. Really quick, Olga, just in relation to sort of drone operators. So let's just say, there's a ABC drone company. So someone owns that, and then they've got a CEO, a CRP, and a remote pilot. Where do they fall into it? I guess the owner is ABC, the company. Is it so where does the CRP fit into this? Are they?
Yes,
I would have they still sign off on the approvals and things like that. So they still, for the navigation.
No, but there's still an employee of the company, aren't they? So long as that's the case, it is the corporate responsibility that obviates any of the CIP responsibility, if that makes sense. I think it's section. Let's have a look. Section 7 of the Act says that if an employee of a person uses an aircraft in the course of their employment, whether or not it is authorized to do so, then the employee is not taken to use the aircraft, but the employer is taken to use the aircraft. So basically, it is the employer that is liable for the actions of the employee who flies the drone for them. So I would have thought that the CRP will occupies, even though they're very senior in their position, they occupy no different position in terms of being an employee of a company than any other pilot for the purposes of the Act. Yes.
Hey, just a reminder to everyone, the Q&A is there. So if you've got any questions, please place through. James is going to do a presentation, and then we'll have a fair bit of time for some Q&A and answer some specific questions. So I'm very grateful to introduce James Ainsley. So he's an insurance industry professional with 15 years experience. He's worked in both the broking and the insurance environments, primarily supporting commercial SME and enterprise clients in a wide range of industry. He's been working in the drone industry since early 2022 and helping Precision Autonomy drone-specific insurance solution for both the broking and the consumer clients. So Precision Autonomy, I know many of you probably on this call, it does end up going to them. They do a lot of the for a lot of the drone organisation. So they can offer commercial drone operator specialised insurance that is tailorable and deliverable via a smart online platform. I know a lot of you know Simon and the rest of the team have a deep aviation insurance experience and are committed to supporting a safe adoption to autonomous services with a high level of customer service. So you can find out more if you click onto or scan that QR code. You can find more about precision autonomy. All right, let's stop sharing and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect. Go for it.
What an intro. Thank you for the warm welcome. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. I should say a quick thank you also to Hover just for running these sessions and I guess the overall contribution to thought leadership in the industry. It's important and it's great to be a part of it. So hi everyone. I should also say a brief thank you to all our existing clients in the room. We really appreciate your business and your support. And for those of you who aren't yet Precision Autonomy clients, we remain eternally optimistic. Feel free to call me at any time. I do have a presentation. I'll just share now. Can you see that okay, Jackie?
Yep, perfect.
Great. So I was thinking a little bit about how I could start with a shameless plug. So I'll do that shamelessly. Jackie's really drilled into it, but yeah, Precision Autonomy Insurance is a commercial drone specific underwriting agency. So we offer insurance coverage for commercial drone operators in Australia and also in New Zealand. Very briefly, the couple of things that we think make us different is when you talk to us at Precision Autonomy, you're generally talking to actual decision makers. So Simon is our head of underwriting. He certainly has the aviation chops and background. That's not my background. My background is in insurance, but we're generally the ones on the phone or answering emails. That lets us, I guess, take a kind of a detailed view and drill into things, to take the time to kind of understand things, ask the right questions. Because commercial drone insurance is the only product we offer, we're also quite interested in the industry and supporting the industry, and also looking at things that are complex, difficult, atypical, taking the time to understand those. Because we feel that it's important to support the industry. I do need to provide a brief disclaimer, just because we're talking about risk and insurance and liability and all those sorts of things. So please, all info's general in nature only. If you're going to do anything in the contractual or the liability or the insurance space, please get some advice that takes into account your specific circumstances. Battery sold separately. Backside covered. So I thought what we would do today was just touch on a few general points around insurance in the industry, some trends, and then if any of those pique anyone's interest, we can take them away in a little more detail and pull them apart in the Q&A. So look, nothing here should be of surprise, but the trends that we're seeing in the industry overall are for larger and higher value assets to do more difficult things. And, there's real world examples of that at the moment. We've seen some regulatory change around, for example, BVLOS. We're seeing bigger units come onto the market, the commercial market for things like agricultural spraying. So no surprises there. The other trend we're seeing is for more formalised contracting arrangements. So, signing on the dotted line when people are doing work for other people. And that's creating some interesting scenarios when washed up against the liability framework that Olga outlined. I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep moving through these pretty rapidly. In terms of a common question we get is, what are the sorts of claims as an insurance provider that you see? I know today we're here to talk about liability. It's fair to say that the majority of the claims that we're seeing are still for damage to physical assets, so damage to the drone. And generally the causative factor of those is either something going wrong with the drone, so hardware or software failure, or pilot error, or, you know, in your typical Swiss cheese model style, a combination of both. In terms of flight liability claims, so, you know, crashing into something or someone or dropping a payload, those volumes of claims are still low to moderate, which is great news. But obviously, particularly in the federal framework where there's unlimited liability, there's high potential severity in those claims. So we're very interested in sort of understanding what those trends will continue to look like, and making sure that we're offering cover that meets those needs. Just briefly, some specific observations, I guess, from the ground as an insurance provider around liability in this space. So again, these are wide ranging and quite general, and we can drill into any of these in the Q&A. But it's interesting. We are still seeing, I guess, businesses grapple with the terminology around the liability framework. And I think understanding that liability is just a broad catch-all, and then drilling down a bit deeper into, you know, what do we mean when we're talking about liability is very important. So in our insurance product, you know, I like to think we're quite clear. We talk about flight liability and we talk about ground-based public liability as two distinct things, and we think that's important. We're seeing organisational understanding of those liability frameworks being challenged, and that's a really important conversation. So we'd encourage pilots to sort of talk internally within your organisations about that liability framework, particularly the federal framework that Olga's talked about, because an understanding of that framework is really important when you look at things like risk management, contract management, you know, onboarding, and a lot of those other activities that an organisation might do. In terms of the insurance piece, the other observation I'd make is we do quite frequently see organisations who've chosen to cover their aerial exposure via extensions to a general liability program they may already have. I don't want to get too sort of into the weeds on the insurance piece there, but we certainly think there are some potential downsides to doing that. And if you're going to do that, there's certainly some questions to ask to make sure that the cover actually does what it needs to do in the context of that liability framework. And the last one, and I think it was a great question from Jackie to Olga, was just about understanding the liabilities for the various individuals involved in the supply chain, and again making sure that any insurance coverage held ensures the right people for the right things. And yeah, one of the things we include in our coverage is an open pilot warranty to pick up pilots who may come and fly for an organisation. I'll finish just with some brief points on I think some things that hopefully will help you get the best out of your insurance provider, and also help your organisation to do that. We certainly see the role of chief pilot as critical. It's something we like to understand, you know, who they are, what they do, and we think that, you know, chief pilot can really have an influence on risk within an organisation as well. So you know, the first thing I would raise would be if you have a tricky question that you need to unpick, roundtable communication with your insurance provider, your broker, and anyone else, any other stakeholder internally on your side, can be really helpful. It's something that Jackie has done with us, and what it tends to do is shorten time frame for responses and get everyone the information they need to make decisions really quickly. So we're really keen to have those kind of conversations, bring everyone to the table, unpick something tricky, work through it and finalise it, as opposed to sort of long email chains bouncing around various stakeholders. The other point I'd like to touch on is just making sure, particularly in large organisations, that the part of the business buying and managing the insurance is talking to and understanding the operational requirements of the business from a flight perspective. We do see some coverages out there which have limitations on, for example, number of flight hours per drone or number of drones in the air, or the need to name pilots for them to be insured. All of that's okay, provided there's systems and procedures within the organisation to comply with those. Asset and document management is another one which I know sounds really boring, and I'm sorry, but it's really important. So keeping good asset registers up to date is very helpful. It's something we love to see as an insurer. There's, aside from the difficulty of managing that paperwork, when something's half completed, a bit scrappy or a bit ratty, it potentially leads to other questions about risk management and communication. So keeping those really good records in the right place so that we can have them quickly if we need them is very helpful to us. And the last one is just timing. So in line with that trend that we talked about of operations getting potentially more complex, if you are planning on doing something new or unusual or exciting, as an insurance provider, we would love to hear about that. I think there's times when things need to move quickly, but there's also times when we get a late Friday mercy call because something is happening on a Saturday, and insurance has been the last thing that's been thought about. So the more time that you can provide your insurance provider, particularly on those trickier things, I would suggest the more likely you are to get a positive response and a helpful response and a useful set of terms and conditions. I'll finish there, and happy to pick apart in detail any of that in the Q&A. And thank you again for the opportunity to present.
Perfect. I'll get you to stop sharing and I'll throw some questions quickly and then I'll go into the Q&A. Yeah, now I can see it. Really quick, and I know I simplify it. Look, I'm going to let everyone out there. Assurances and all the liabilities has been probably my biggest challenge since starting a drone organisation. It's not something, and James can attest to that, it's something that gets to that time, and mine is April every year, that everything's due for renewal, or a new contract comes in, and it's like, with international peoples and new drones, and, now we're doing BVLOS or something new. James, really quickly, is most insurances to a specific task as well? So let's just say, a lot of people have been flying visual line of sight for a long time. If they start, hey, we're going to start flying over people now, or we're going to start flying BVLOS, do they need to inform the insurance company, or they automatically approved as long as they're approved by CASA?
Yeah, so great question, Jackie. I would say, and I can't speak for all of our competitors because different insurers will manage that differently. From our perspective, the way we insure is based on operation and use per drone. So yes, that's something you would need to be telling us about. I would think that as a general principle, always better to disclose to your insurer and get their perspective on something if you're not sure. I would be reasonably confident that the majority of drone insurers out there would want to know if you are operating BVLOS, and if you haven't told them and could be in a spot of bother.
Can I ask a question? This is, I'm going to think, so it's a sort of scenario, sort of a basis. So, you know, there's a lot of miscommunication with, you know, flights over people, and lately CAS has now defined, you know, shielding and sheltering and things like that, where a lot of people, a lot of drone operators and CRPs out there used to think, you know, they could fly over or near a car, for example, because, you know, there's a person in the car, but they're shielded or sheltered, even though the legislation, they're within 30 metres, so they can't. Can I ask, if say someone was flying over a car and they didn't have that approval, and there was an incident that happened, like let's just say it came down and hit the car, which may have caused a car accident, could quite easily happen. Are they usually covered because they're now going against the legislation? So obviously there'll be strict liability. Would they be covered by insurance, or because they're not operating to the legislation, would the insurance companies not usually cover that? That's to both of you.
I'm happy to kick that one off.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so look, again, from our perspective, in terms of how our policy works, that there's a couple of key clauses in the coverage to be really aware of. One is an absolute exclusion for illegal uses, and the other one is a condition which basically says, no, you do have to be flying within all statutory requirements for coverage to apply. So yeah, that's pretty simple, and that really puts the onus back on the pilot and the organisation to make sure they're flying in line with all statutory requirements and with the correct licensing and approval for that individual flight.
Yeah. So even if they're not aware of it, like let's just say that, you know, they've interpreted a regulation different, it still might not be covered.
Yeah, correct. I mean, each claim scenario is obviously a little bit different, Jackie. But in general terms, yeah, there's absolutely an obligation to comply with all of those requirements for coverage to be in place.
Yeah. Look, online, we've got a lot of, you know, people that do events and film. I can see, you know, a handful of people that I know I've worked with over the last few years. And something that I know frustrates them great end is often they will sit here, and I know I've worked with some of them, and it's taken a year to say, get, you know, an approval to fly over an event or to fly, whatever that's been. And then sometimes, you know what, we had one a few weeks ago with a client that didn't get to go through. You know what, CASA's wait times were terrible, and it was just like, nope, it's not going to get through. We couldn't get a 3 nautical mile approval within that time frame, so they had to go and tell the event organizer, no, we can't get the approval, it can't go through. And then obviously, I know this story isn't common for all of you, the next day, you know, they've just got an excluded operator or anyone that doesn't actually know the, you know, the regulations to fly or to do that. Is there any liability to the person hiring the person? If they're aware of, and say something did happen, they're aware that, you know, you need approvals and you need this, can the event organizer be liable? Probably for you, Olga.
Yeah, I thought it was for me. Sure. Look, not the answer to that is not under the strict and unlimited liability regime, because it only applies to owners and operators in certain circumstances unless exclusions apply. But as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, that regime is not exclusive. So there's still liability, there's scope for liability in those circumstances, and one can imagine various ways in which it could be applicable. But one is in negligence, for example. So someone might claim that, you know, in engaging a drone operator who was not competent to do the job or was not aware, and in all the circumstances, the hiring company, so to speak, was not did not take reasonable care in respect of a particular class of persons on the ground who might have gotten injured or was injured in the circumstances. And for example, I think I've looked at this question, those cases that I shared the links to, the owner of the neighbouring land, if we take that example, who hired the air spray operator to do the spraying of the crops on their behalf. there was a claim against the owner for negligence in engaging the airspray operator, if that makes sense. In those circumstances, it wasn't proven, but there is still exposure to liability, although it's not as strict in a sense that you don't need to prove anything. You still need to prove a lot of things to get to the end result, but there's still liability exposure. That's my answer to that.
Yeah, perfect. And I've got another question because I know that you'll have to duck off. And this one from Matthew: what is the CRP personal liability under Part 101 of the CASA regs? We can skip them as well. We can come back later to. I guess, you know what, I can reframe this question. Yeah. You know, there's most of the people online are CRPs here. How do we protect ourselves? Like, do we hold, you know, should we be holding like our own insurance? Like, you know, how do we protect ourselves as the CRP? You know, we've got some people I know on the call have, you know, up to 200 pilots working under them as well. Like, is there something we should be doing to protect ourselves as a chief remote pilot?
I can talk a little bit to the insurance piece there, Jackie. And I think you know, I'd start by saying it probably comes back to that understanding of liability just being a general catch-all word for kind of a whole bucket of stuff that, you know, could go wrong effectively. And you know, my perspective would be some of those things for a CRP might be insurable. Some of them might be insurable under a range of different products, and some of them might not be. You know, in terms of the obvious stuff, so for example, you know, crashing a drone into something or someone, you know, that's kind of what we're here for. Some of the other pieces in terms of, you know, advice or, you know, administration or fleet management or, you know, doing something for another organisation. Yeah, I think it'd be prudent to get some advice on specifically what those exposures are and, you know, whether they can be transferred to an insurer or dealt with in another way.
Yeah,
don't know if you'd agree with that,
and
Olga?
look, and I can answer that because I know that everyone here knows that we act as chief pilot to a lot of people, and we do have a lot of additional insurance to cover that because we offer advice all the time. So we do hold, you know, individual professional indemnity insurance as well. This one is another question. Look, and so we'll see if you know it. I don't like to throw questions in, but it's how does the owner operator rule apply to government organisation with a director general, executive director and a CRP? The director general is usually the executive of the REOC, and the CRP holds a CRP position. But recognise, how does it work? Does the owner operator rule work for governments as well?
I was just thinking about that just before. I think the answer to that is on the current state of how the Act is drafted, it does not, it only deals with owner and operator. And I think it's a very good question and a really good pickup. I think this circumstance has not been anticipated by the Act. And so if there was, and one might need to get creative in anticipating how a court faced with this situation might deal with it. So one would think they'd likely to be more pragmatic in their approach and say that the operator is the REOC holder. But again, like that's not obviously been tested and hasn't been anticipated by the Act. So it's really difficult to answer that. But in short, I also am not sure there is an answer, to be honest, other than this speculation. So
look, a lot of the larger organisations, I know a lot of the governments, unis, and that there's a lot of self-insured policies. I know a lot of the mining and even utility clients that's how they are. A lot of these organisations are also working REOC and excluded operations. So I'm sure you're both sort of familiar. So the REOC, you know, with trained pilots and excluded. Where does the liability like obviously, you know, we know that, you know, the chief boat pilot, we're signing off on jobs, pilots go and do it. We know that, hey, the chief pilot will end up in court with the CEO. With excluded operations operating in these sort of environments, does the liabilities or that fall more back on the pilot, or is it more come back through to different legislation, like I guess work health and safety and things like that? Where does excluded operators fit into it?
Can you define excluded operators, Jackie?
Excluded operators are operating for commercial purposes under a company, but they're not operating under the CASA remote operation certificate. So there's CASA's obviously got the excluded operation, so they're still following a pathway legally, but a lot of people out there often say, oh, we'll just operate excluded because, you know, there's no, you know, we're not going to get audited, we're not going to do this. It's sort of a bit more of a free-for-all. Not saying every excluded operator, so don't get mad at me and everyone, but yeah, so where does that liability fall for that excluded operator?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's excluded or not. The same liability regime applies as far as the strict and unlimited liability applies. So, yeah, that's
would they be more personally liable though? So because they're not operating, or really that doesn't make a huge amount of difference?
I don't think so, because that's not the requirement under the Act. None of the, whether you're operating within a particular parameters of CASA's approval or not, is not a requirement for or a qualifier to a liability, or that's not a factor that is prescribed under the Act that will be considered by the court. It may as well be argued that should be considered. I wouldn't exclude that, but as hard and fast rule, that's definitely not the case.
Yeah, perfect. What we might do is stay on everyone. We'll have some more questions, but I'm going to finish up my presentation so I know Olga can make it off to a court case. But obviously, James, are you happy to hang around for a few extra minutes? Have you got a hard stop?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yep.
So then we'll stay around. So I'll just share back to my screen as soon as my team have lovely created some slides for me. Firstly, if you missed the last webinar, the first one, we talked a lot about the new legislations and different things for CRPs. You can go onto our website and go through that QR code there, or just go through our website and then just put your details in and you'll have access to the full recording. The same with this one, it will probably within a week, will go online as well. We will be running, as I said, every 2 months of professional development. If your organisation, you have a professional development program, let me know. I have had to fill out some forms to say, you know, there'll be 6 hours per year that they can claim as professional development time by doing these series. The next one, we're going to talk about the ins and outs of health checks, CASA surveillance event and BARS audits. Looking at BARS audits from both ways, I've noticed a lot of governments and mining and utilities are starting to say, you know what, if anyone's going to work as a contractor on board, you need BARS certification. So look at it from, hey, do we need to, you know, start incorporating that into our tenders, and also look at it from the CRP, or what does it take to go get that BARS certification? And also CASA's doing a lot of surveillance events out there at the moment. So we're going to have someone from CASA come on just to talk about what they look for in a CASA surveillance event. And as I said, David Anderson from the Flight Safety Foundation's agreed to come on as well. So I'm going to stop sharing. And thank you so much to Olga and James. Like I know how I value your time, not just on this session, but off time as well, and how many times you answer all my crazy questions that I come up with. But I really, really thank you, and good luck in your court today, Olga. But no, we really do appreciate your time and coming along.
Thanks very much for having me, Jackie, and everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out at any time. We will be collaborating with the AUS later in the year to explore some of these scenarios as well. So if you are part of that and looking out and are interested in the topic, I'd love for you to come along to our office to some sort of a brainstorming session. So, but I better run off. But thanks very much for having me again, and hope to cross paths again later.
Yeah, perfect. Great, thank you. We'll still answer any questions anyone may have. So just fling them through, and yeah, we can still have an open conversation and ask James why he's here. I know I always have lots of crazy questions for them. Let me see if there's any. What was that? James, how can precision agriculture help with insurance with operations under the Model Aircraft Act?
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing from that question is non-commercial operations. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of our perspective on commercial use, that's kind of one of our, I guess, key underwriting criteria is the drone being used commercially. And you know, we take a broad view of what commercial use is. So that doesn't have to be used for specific revenue generation in and of itself, as in, you know, you don't have to be sending someone an invoice for hours in the air. That could be used, for example, you know, in your own commercial farming operation. In terms of how that flows through to non-commercial use. So we can't insure recreational or pleasure users. Someone like a higher education institution, yeah, we would view that drone use as, you know, part of their business, which is higher education, effectively. In terms of you know, whether they need to insure everything, from an asset perspective and a liability perspective, that kind of comes down to the individual uses and drone weights on the day, I guess. So again, that's probably something to get some advice on and really understand what's being flown where and how that fits within that liability framework, and then transfer those risks across. It feels like a long answer.
No, I think
the question.
Yeah, no, I think you've covered that. That whole area was always sort of confused me. I know that, you know, school programs and where does it fit, because sometimes they can get, you know, exempt from different regulations. And does anyone have any further questions at all? Okay, I've got one here. Sorry, I've got a few. It just sort of popped up. Sorry. This is from Peter. CASA requires an AOC operator to have SMS safety management system officer in place. Requirements for drone operators. I can probably answer that. At this stage that we don't, it doesn't mean in the future that is not going to change. A lot of the new approvals we're sort of working through for, you know, flying over people, and that safety management system is becoming more and more a huge part of this. So we're going to start to see that, I would say, in the future, that there will need to be an SMS officer in place. Did you have anything else to answer that to James?
Not really, Jackie, but other than, you know, would agree, you know, as we move towards things like, you know, ultimately AAM, right, carrying people, you know, there's no doubt that those kind of requirements are going to keep moving and keep moving pretty fast. Yeah.
Yeah. This was from Rob. Let's see who it was for. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to read this. I've seen media operating drones beyond the factory specification, you know, wind, IP rating. Would insurance cover the use of drones that is not IP rated, that has been used in rain when rain wasn't a casual factor, when rain wasn't the casual factor in the accident or the incident?
Oh, great question. So there will be broad catch-all conditions in the coverage, which will effectively exclude cover if you're operating outside of manufacturer specifications. Maintenance being obviously a key one of those to be aware of. Yeah, look, it then from there becomes probably a depends question. You know, depends what else was going on if there was an issue. So, you know, it's easy to say that, you know, water wasn't the causal factor. You know, what else was going on? What are the other relevant terms and conditions? You know, what else was happening? Yeah, so it's hard to kind of rule in or out. It'll come down again to the specifics on the day.
I'm not sure if they're going to be able to answer this fully. I mean, obviously, it more falls into ICAO law. I'll throw it out there though, but obviously there's been a lot of talk within industry about the 12 nautical mile. So obviously CASIC only govern up to 12 nautical miles off the coast. So if you're operating as a company and you want to fly BVLOS, they can only give permissions for that. So a lot of oil and gas companies, or once they go outside those Australian water areas or outside from a territory, they're no longer, need to apply they fall under the ICAO. So what I think he's saying is the scenario is a remote pilot has been contracted to a BVLOS mission. It could be from Australia, then going out, say, 20 nautical miles. So outside the Australian territory waters. The remote pilot operates under a REOG. It probably, I doubt it's going to be covered because a REOC can only authorize, a chief remote pilot can only authorize a pilot up to the 12 nautical miles. They're not authorized to operate outside under a CASA REOC at this stage. There's a lot of work that's being done into this space, and I know CASA's been sending out a lot of the different legislation, so I'd probably contact them to get a lot of that list, or if you send me an email after, I can forward you what they've sent me in the past. Do you have, how does that work with insurance? Are you only covered, or is it just the same as if they're approved to operate, or if they're operating outside, are they covered by insurance?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I must admit it's not a scenario I'd thought of. The couple of things that I'd probably add to that would be, firstly, most insurance policies, or certainly the policy that we issue, will come with some geographic limitations. So you are covered for operating within these territories. So it would be worth understanding what they are from a coverage perspective and how that interacts with where you're flying. And then secondly, I would say, that's, it's a good case study. It's one that I'd be encouraging you to actually talk to your coverage provider about. We certainly, our insurance security is provided by a specialist aviation insurer. So, just because something isn't immediately picked up by terms and conditions of a policy doesn't mean, you can't find a way to cover it if that's kind of physically possible within the law, I guess. Yeah. That would be all I would add.
There's one more question from me, and this might have been more for Olga, but I'll see, James, if you've got any thoughts of it. It goes back to, everyone on this call tries to do the right thing. Obviously, they wouldn't be on this sort of call. But, within organisations, and I know even some that, I might, help or act as CRP for, that obviously there's people that operate under REOC excluded, but then there's also a lot of people that just operate, that the company's not aware of it. Let's just say, it could be a big mine, or it could be, a big site somewhere that, someone will just bring their drone along and fly. Would they be covered? Like, where do you think that person would fall, if something does happen?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, Jackie. I mean, I certainly suspect that there is a level of not malicious, but potentially kind of unwitting self-insurance or uninsurance or underinsurance out there. And I think, that there's kind of an industry awareness piece, that we probably all have a role to push up the hill. In terms of look, are those people covered? That really depends on whether they've bought insurance and also bought a product that's kind of suitable. And if I would again assume if you're flying without appropriate approvals and licensing, you're not covered anyway. But if you're doing that, it's potentially unlikely that you've thought about other things like insurance. So yeah, look, I think we need to be aware of that. I think we all have a role to kind of push that along and call that out if needed.
One last question from me. From your experience, what are you seeing? Not like, obviously there's a lot of insurance claims come through. I know I placed one from you earlier. Are you finding that most are being, what is the reason why? Let's just say they're rejected. Say, hey, I've done a flight and something's happened and it's gone into water, or there's something. What are the reasons why the insurance companies are stopping? Is it to do with like the maintenance isn't being done, or what is the reasons why like a company like you would deny the insurance?
Yeah. So really good question. The short answer is, and it's good news. That's not a really common scenario. Which means everyone's kind of doing the right thing. Maintenance is probably one of the areas where we would deny a claim, and we have. And that can be a range of areas, but certainly cleaning and kind of cleaning, particularly in agricultural use, is one thing that we've seen some issues with. Other than that, it tends to potentially come down more to actually managing the kind of the managerial and paperwork element of the insurance product, as opposed to the flight operation. So making sure that the operator has the cover they need that covers what they are doing. We
and
also
look,
see.
I'm going to say I know so many CRPs out there, like don't only because I'm the CEO as well. I've had to look at it, but that don't actually know what coverage they have, because it's something that the government or the board, like their CEO or someone else has organised, or they say, oh, don't worry, we're self-insured, we're a big organisation, but there's no. When they go into it, there's actually no listing of any aviation related things. So are they actually covered? So I guess it's important for the CRPs to ask the question, saying, what are we covered for? Can I read the policy?
Yeah, agree completely. And look, I know I breezed through the slides, but yeah, that would be a great takeaway in terms of, if you work in a larger, smaller organisation, often the pilot is the owner anyway. So, it kind of all works itself out. But larger organisation where someone else is doing the insurance buying, that kind of roundtable discussion and pulling things apart, before they go wrong, is a really, really good idea. And helps everyone.
Yep. All right. Well, I might let's see if I've got any other Q&A. Otherwise, we might finish it up. We've already gone over a little bit. Oh, hang on. I've got one from Simon. Can you operate a drone visual line of sight other than outside or other outside the 12 nautical miles? No, you can't. Unfortunately, you cannot operate. I do know CASA used to. I think they made a big mistake a few years ago and did issue a few companies out on the West Coast some approvals to operate out of the oil and gas sites. They did retract them last year when they got further guidance from ACICA, but unfortunately at this stage you cannot operate under CASA outside that. CASA have their legal, Jonathan Alec has placed, a very good description of, why they can't do this and what are the pathway. They are working on a working group with the rest of the world, trying to solve what sort of approvals and how people would operate outside 12 nautical miles. So Simon, as I said, mention it to me. I'll flick you what Jonathan and the CASA team have sent to us before. Otherwise, reach out to CASA and get guidance on it. Perfect. I think there's no more questions. Do you have anything to add, James, before we finish up? Any words of wisdom?
No, nothing other than obviously another thank you, and probably just a parting word that please don't let the insurance part be the forgotten part of your operation, but also don't let it be the scary part. I think, I would like to think the insurers are quite reasonable. I know that we certainly are. And we would much rather be having a conversation, even if it's a theoretical one, before something happens. So, rather than kind of treating it as paperwork that sits in the bottom drawer, pull it out, dust it off, engage with it and engage with your professional providers.
Yeah, perfect. I want to thank everyone for sort of staying on for this time and, you know, learning and listening. Look, we're always here. So if anyone has any questions, we love, you know, chatting. More than happy to have a discussion. At the moment, our biggest hot topics are flights over or near people. That's probably what I think most of our team sort of working on every single day. Which is good because if you know what, it's actually not that difficult now. CASA have placed these options for people to get these, so it makes sense just to go get that approval because then you are covered. Like if you are flying, you know, near a road or a car or something like that, if you've got the approval, you're more likely to be covered in things. So please reach out. Happy to sort of discuss some options for people that are wanting to get those additional approvals to help them along the way. So that's all. Thanks so much for joining. And as mentioned, the webinar will be on our website probably in a week, but we will also email out that link to everyone as well. Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thanks all.